Deadly clashes are underway in Yemen, where the Saudi-led coalition is ramping up its latest assault. Troops are fighting to retake the key port city of Hodeida. Right now, it's controlled by Houthi rebels, and it's a critical area where Yemen receives what little food it can get, as the country faces a major famine outbreak.
Government forces have captured a town near Hodeida. This is just the latest round of violence in Yemen's devastating 3-year civil war. The Houthi rebels are backed by Iran. They're fighting against the Yemeni government, which is supported by the Saudi-led coalition.
So for more on this, we want to bring in Cipher Brief analyst Norman Roule. He's joining us now from Washington. So Norman, can you just sort of take us through the latest developments in this area on the new assault on Hodeida, and also explain just why this port city is just so important?
Thank you and good morning. Hodeida remains a critical element for the humanitarian situation in Yemen and for the Saudi-led coalition to achieve its military goals in country. 70% of the humanitarian aid enters Yemen through the port of Hodeida. It has been under control of the Houthi fighters for approximately 3 years. They earn about $30 million a month in port fees and allegedly import weapons through the port. So if you're the coalition, capture of the port of Hodeida would allow the Yemeni government to restore control of one of its primary deepwater ports, as well as to take a substantial amount of money away from the primary rebel force in country. The coalition is working very hard to avoid civilian and infrastructure damage. They have heard loud and clear from the United States and the international community that this is something that must be avoided. They're moving slowly, and currently they appear to be approaching the Hodeida airport from its western end, which will be important to their future military operations.
Norman, as you know, 10,000 people have been killed. 22 million Yemenis need humanitarian assistance. 8 million people are at risk of starving. What is it going to take to end this war?
It will take a political compromise. And from the perspective of the Emiratis, the Saudis, and the Yemen official government, the Houthis have just refused to accept a diplomatic solution. There have been more than a handful of attempts at political compromise, and the Houthis have walked away from each of them. As recently as early May, the Yemeni government and the United Nations offered to take control of Hodeida port in order to facilitate and improve humanitarian supplies. The Houthis, gaining so much money as they do from the port and allegedly weapons from Iran, declined this. But the humanitarian tragedy it's beyond catastrophic. More than 1 million cases of cholera, 18 million Yemenis in danger of starvation. This is an extraordinary catastrophe that must end as quickly as possible. And the Saudi-led coalition believes that the best way to do this is to remove Hodeida from Houthi control.
So let's talk about America's role in this. You mentioned that America made it clear that they wanted to limit civilian casualties and any damage to infrastructure. But is America really doing enough to bring this to an end?
Well, America's position on this has been complicated. Traditionally, we have provided the Saudi-led coalition only with intelligence support to help them avoid civilian casualties, assistance in using, understanding how best to use American-provided weapons so that they are most accurate, and again, avoiding civilian casualties, and some refueling. It's now unclear as to exactly what support the U.S. is providing, but I believe it's critical that we do everything we can to make sure that this military campaign, given that it's underway, inflicts as little damage on the infrastructure and on the civilian community as possible.
So, Norman, as you know, the United Nations is holding an emergency meeting today on Yemen. Can we expect any real change to come from the UN?
Very unlikely. The United Nations doesn't have a tremendous amount of influence over this conflict. Again, the Houthis refuse to come to the table. Seriously, the Iranians are a malign and terrifically damaging force in providing weapons and advisors to the Houthis, which have extended the conflict and exacerbated the civilian casualties. And finally, the Saudi, Emiratis, and other members of the coalition believe that the best way to bring this conflict to an end is to militarily damage the Houthi force. So the United Nations doesn't have a lot of influence.
All right, Norman Roule in Washington for us. Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.